By coming to the core principles in bioethics modeling, we are getting the description of the way how bioethics form, how bioethics use as the institutional procedure of the scientific research. One of the reasons why we are mentioning the core principles in bioethics modeling is that such principles will be universal. That's one of the main ground for the further development, the main route for the further development of the bioethics, which can become universal science. Only core principles, which will be later on changed and renovated, of course, because it will be a response to the social situation, have to make the universal description, have to make the universal nature itself. Let's come to Thomas Becham's and James Childress' understanding of such a principles in bioethics. I want to describe to you this quote from Becham's and Childress' work, the core manuscript Principles of Biomedical Ethics, the first edition of which were published in 1979. So, beginning of the quote. Believe that principles provide the most general and comprehensive norms that guide actions. The difference between rules and principles is that rules are more specific in content and more restricted in scope than principles. The end of the quote. Here, I want to underline to you such a vision that these differences between rules and the principles are close to the nature of the bioethics, because principles are creating the scope and creating the inclusion of the content of the information, including content of the research in field of bioethics, with the help of the main ideas, with the help of such thing as the principles. So once more, it was a quote from the fundamental manuscript Principles of Biomedical Ethics, written by Becham's and Childress, the American scholars in the field of bioethics. Modern philosophy proposed secular understanding of human dignity and progressively associate this concept with the idea of human rights. This core principle of human dignity, which were implemented in the vision of the bioethics, it's not just the constructive point, it's not the principle which have supposed to be related with the history of development of bioethics, but it's also the nature of bioethical procedure. You remember we were talking in the first hour conversation concerning the moral judgments, and such a thing as the judgment itself supposed to be related from the personhood to another personhood, to the group of the human beings. So that's why the human dignity became a core principle of bioethics, not incidentally. It's reasonable because it's based on the vision of the mankind, based on the vision of the personhood. And of course, the constructive form of the human rights, which we have after the Second World War, we have mentioned the Nazi Germany as one of the worst things, where the human dignity was fully dismissed, fully demolished, and then after that it was responded from the international community with the idea of the human rights, with the idea of implementation of human rights constructive. In different teachings which were at the philosophy, human dignity was presented as an aspect of personal freedom, like in Giovanni Pico della Mirandola, or an embodiment of one's public worth, like in Thomas Hobbes' vision, or as universal virtue. On this term, you know because we were mentioning it. It was implemented by Immanuel Kant as the category. Unconditional and incomparable worth determined by one's autonomy, rather than origin, wealth, or social status. Yes, once more, that's the reason why Immanuel Kant did implement such a universal virtue of the human dignity. One of the Kant's basic principles of ethics is to treat any other person always at the same time as an end, never merely as a means. Categorical imperative has been accepted by moral and political philosophy as the actual basis for the conception of human rights, and in this sense it's a foundational concept for the further development of the legislative system, for the further development of the modeling of the bioethical structuring, modeling of the bioethics as the science. Such a principle of such a categorical imperative, which gets its root in the Kant's belief, give the inspiration for the development of the sane condition level, actually for the preventing of the changing of the right of the human dignity, preventing the changing of the legislative system. And it's important, it's stable, it's supposed to be stable, it's supposed to be like in no change, like it's the formative logic. In contemporary international law, national constitution, that means the local government, the domestic, the legislative procedure, and other normative documents which are adopted by professionals, by the professional community, particularly at the field of bioethics, at the field of medical ethics, human dignity is strongly connected with system of human rights. Let's see several examples. One of the examples is once more the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Once more, the United Nations were erected as the organization after the end of the Second World War. In 1948, this Universal Declaration, at the December 10, the Article 1 states, the beginning of the quote, "All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights." The end of the quote. So this means we are talking at this Universal Declaration of Human Rights, its first article, about the uniqueness of the human being, and such a uniqueness which is equal and get the status of the protection of the dignity and rights. And its importance for the further development of bioethics, as you have been remembered, it started at the end of the 70s. And of course, Porter's vision of the bioethics, of the modeling of bioethics, get this constructive understanding of equality of the human beings. And such a thing as their dignity became a perspective for the modulating, for the making the models of the effective bioethical procedure. The declaration itself established human rights like freedom from repression, freedom of expression and association, on the inherent dignity of every human being in this universe. This universal declaration have declared it, and later on it's were proven by domestic legislative system, by the system were incorporated into different field of the development of United Nations organizations like UNICEF and UNESCO. Another example is coming from the Council of Europe, the European Convention on Human Rights and Biomedicine. Also, at the earliest started article of this convention, it declares protection of, the quote, "the dignity and identity of all human beings, and guarantees everyone, without discrimination, respect for their integrity and other rights and fundamental freedoms with regard to the application of biology and medicine, its main purpose. So, the end of the quote and the main idea of such a declaration, such a convention, that it gave the actual action procedure, it gave the actual modeling of the system of bioethics to the sphere of implementation of the European law. Human dignity is a foundational concept, and it's theoretically and normatively inappropriate to reduce it to functional characteristics of person's activity. Here you're supposed to understand that the function of the law and function of such a system as bioethics, such a system of philosophical and natural approach on the system of ethics give the characteristics for actual person's activity. It doesn't matter if it's their profession or this person getting their treatment. Ability of human dignity, ability of human being to decision making or to taking into account one's autonomy. Respect for dignity means recognition of others' intrinsic worth as the human being. With these equal forms of the understanding of the dignity, with this equality which were proclaimed by the French Revolution and then implemented into the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and also in the European Convention, it provides to us such an equality as the result for the procedure of bioethics modeling. Equality then, which leads to the understanding of human dignity and its transformation into the system of universal law, universal legislative procedure. If we look more closely at healthcare delivery, we will see that non-diseases conditions are also part of the remit of medicine and surgery. The most obvious treatments, which go beyond the disease-related conditions, are bodily dysfunctions arising from traumas such as broken legs and brain injuries. The main constructive part of the healthcare delivery, based on the systematic approach of the performing human dignity, performing the rights of the getting treatment. And for getting the bioethics modeling part of the healthcare system delivery, we supposed to use the vision of the remit medicine to come the person once more dignitive in the sense not just of the nature, not just of the physiological, but also the narrative part of the values which person has. Restoring proper physical functioning by treating the results of non-disease events are clearly part of the remit of health care provision. And here it's also important to understand that non-disease events can be relatively part to the modeling of bioethical procedure. Human dignity is strongly connected with human rights, and it's important for you to understand such a structural phenomenon of the human dignity as the core principle of the bioethical procedure, core principle of bioethical modeling. And for you in changing world, the human dignity became more light object, became more related with the narrow understanding of the human being as the structural phenomenon of the society. Don't forget to use this at your bioethical procedure of the modeling. And to restore to come to the proper physical function, we're supposed to fully understand the treatment procedure. We're supposed to fully understand the interconnection between the treatment as the part of the medical procedure and actually bioethical, psychological implementation of the dignity itself.